It always starts the same way. A place that felt safe, a sound you couldn't place, then that single stomach-sinking moment when your brain screams, "Run," but your body just freezes. I'm not talking about campfire tales or urban legends whispered at sleepovers. I'm talking about true horror stories, real experiences from real people who stepped into the kind of terror no movie could ever capture, because the fear didn't end when the credits rolled. It followed them home. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 accounts that will shred the boundary between the ordinary world and the unexplainable darkness hiding just behind it. These aren't fiction. The names have been changed to protect the ones who lived through them. But every shiver, every shadow, every desperate moment actually happened. From a remote corner of the American South, where the forest itself seemed to breathe with malevolent intent, to the sun-scorched isolation of the Australian outback, where a couple learned that some horizons can swallow you whole. And finally, to a historic British flat where a young woman discovered that a haunting isn't always a ghost. Sometimes it's a living nightmare that knows your name. If you think you're brave enough, stay with me. But I'm warning you, once you hear what happened to Cole, to Lachlan, and Tegan, and to Isla, the way you look at your own reflection, your own locked door, your own silence will never be the same. Let's begin. If you want more true horror experiences like these, smash that like button. Subscribe with all notifications on. Drop a comment right now, telling me what scares you more, the woods, isolation, or your own home. I read every single one. Cole Maddox had hiked the Leanville Gorge Loop a dozen times, always alone. Always finishing before the mountain dusk turned the trail into a throat of shadow. But that Saturday in late October, everything felt off from the first step. The air was too still, heavy with the wet wool smell of decaying leaves and something sharper beneath it, like rust and spoiled meat, and his compass needle wobbled lazily no matter which direction he faced. So he chalked it up to the iron-rich rock the rangers talked about and pressed on. Boots crunching over acorns as the trees thickened and the light thinned to a sickly amber. By 4 o'clock, the temperature plummeted and the silence became a physical pressure. The kind that makes your own heartbeat sound like someone knocking on a door you can't open. And that's when he heard the first whisper. Not words exactly. More like the shape of his name being pushed through wet lips from somewhere just off the trail to his left. Cole stopped, skin prickling, and called out, "Hello?" with the confident voice men use when they're trying to convince themselves they aren't afraid. But the forest swallowed the sound whole and gave back only the distant rhythmic snap of a branch under something heavy that was moving parallel to him. He walked faster, the rational part of his brain spinning excuses: a deer, a bear, another hiker with bad social skills. But the whisper came again. Closer now, a wet, gurgling exhale that wrapped around the syllables cool, as if the thing speaking had too much saliva in its mouth and not enough throat. His flashlight beam jittered across the trunks and caught something pale, low to the ground, a shape that didn't resolve into anything animal because it was bent the wrong way. Joints articulating backward like a human crawling on all fours with its spine arched up toward the canopy. And for one frozen second, the light glinted off eyes that reflected green-white and were set in a face that was too long. The jaw unhinged slightly, and the skin pulled taut over a skull that seemed to be stretching itself into a grin. Cole ran then, not the controlled jog of a man who respects the terrain, but a full-blown, adrenaline-blind sprint, pack slamming against his spine. Branches whipping his cheeks, the thing crashing through the underbrush right behind him with a gait that was too fast. Kind of scrabbling thunder that ate up the distance between them and was punctuated by that terrible wet breathing as if it were trying to speak through a throat full of water. He burst out of the tree line onto a fire road he didn't recognize, lungs burning, and dared to glance back, just as his dying headlamp caught the creature skidding to a stop at the very edge of the trees. And he saw it fully, a naked, emaciated form with skin the color of old milk, arms and legs too long for its torso, fingers tipped with cracked nails that dug furrows into the dirt. And that face, that grinning face, was now tilted as if it was curious, cocked like a dog hearing a whistle. And it opened its mouth and emitted a sound that was a perfect mimicry of Cole's own panicked breathing, a playback of his terror, before it slowly, deliberately backed into the shadows and was gone. He made it to his truck, keys slipping in his shaking hands, and drove 3 hours without stopping. But the real horror started when he got home. His front door, which he always locked, was standing wide open.
Boom.
And on his kitchen table sat a single, still wet oak leaf and a small human-like tooth that smelled of rot. He moved out of the state within a week and never spoke of it publicly until a year. Later, when a mutual friend got him drunk enough to whisper, "It knew my name, and it followed me home, and I don't think it's done." The Leanville Gorge has older names among the Cherokee places where the land is said to be hungry and whatever. Cole Maddox met in that hollow is still there, still learning voices, still waiting for someone to answer when it whispers their name. Lachlan Byrne and his partner Tegan had been driving the Savannah Way for 3 days, chasing the kind of isolation that city people romanticize until they're actually in it. And by the time they pulled their 4WD onto a rutted Track 50, kilometers from the nearest cattle station, the sun was a white-hot hammer, and the horizon shimmered with mirages that looked like sheets of glass hanging in the air. They set up camp near a dry creek bed lined with ghost gums, so ancient they seemed to be holding the sky up. And Tegan remarked that the silence out here was different, not peaceful, but expectant, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make a mistake. The first night passed uneventfully except for the dreams. Lachlan dreamed of being buried up to his neck in red dirt while something invisible pressed a thumb gently into the crown of his head. And Tegan woke twice with the unshakable sensation that someone had been standing at the foot of their swag, a tall figure just beyond the mesh, perfectly still. They laughed it off over breakfast, blaming the heat and the isolation, and decided to explore an outcrop of sandstone Tegan had spotted on the map, a place marked with nothing but a dotted boundary and the word Kadesha in faded print. The walk should have taken 2 hours, but an hour in the landscape began to repeat itself. The same twisted gum, the same scatter of bleached kangaroo bones, the same rock that looked like a face with its mouth open in a scream, and Lachlan, who prided himself on his bush sense, felt a cold dread uncoil in his stomach because their tracks in the dust were leading in a circle, something the land didn't allow unless you were being walked by something else. A silhouette of a tall Aboriginal man in ceremonial paint, his body adorned with feathers and ochre, and his feet wrapped in what looked like emu feather shoes. And he was completely motionless, facing them but not seeing them. His presence a hole in the air. Lachlan called out a greeting, respectful, the way you speak to elders. Not from the figure, but from the ground itself, a vibration that came up through their boots and into their teeth. And Tegan whispered Kadesha man, her voice tight with a terror she didn't fully understand but felt in her marrow. The figure took 1 step forward, a movement that wasn't a walk so much as a glide, the feet not touching the red earth, and as it moved, the sky behind it began to darken, not with clouds, but with a kind of absence. Singing a song that Lachlan's mind couldn't hold on to because the words were older than language, and they were being pulled into his ears whether he wanted them or not. Tegan screamed, and the sound snapped whatever held them. They turned and ran with no direction except away, crashing through spin effects that sliced their shins, plunging the whole world into a deep amber twilight in which shadows moved independently of any object. They ran until Tegan collapsed, coughing up dust, and when Lachlan looked back, the ridge was empty. The figure gone, the sky clear and blue and utterly indifferent, but the humming was inside his head now. A low drone that would never fully leave. They found the 4WD after what felt like hours, though the clock said only 11 minutes had passed. And they drove without stopping through the night, neither of them speaking. In the months that followed, Tegan would wake up with red dirt under her fingernails, no matter how often she scrubbed. And Lachlan would catch himself drawing the same symbol over and over in the margins of his work notebook, a circle with a dot in the center, a tracking mark. They learned later that Kadisha men are lore keepers, executioners who can walk between worlds, and that stepping into their songline uninvited is like walking into a net made of consequences. The last thing Lachlan said to me before he ended the call was, "We didn't just see him, he saw us. And now we're in his story, and you don't leave a story until it's finished." Tegan has since refused to leave the city. Lachlan told me that sometimes, in the dead of night, he can still feel the vibration rising through the floorboards, and he knows that out there in the red center, a painted figure is still walking, still humming, and still waiting for them to come back and finish what they started. Isla Drummond had lived in the Georgian flat on Ann Street for 6 months before she acknowledged that the sounds coming from beneath her kitchen floor were not mice, not pipes, but something with intention. The flat was beautiful. High ceilings, sash windows that rattled in the wind off the Firth of Forth. Original timber floors that sloped charmingly, but it had a smell in the kitchen that no amount of bleach could shift. A sweet, musty odor, like old flowers left too long in a vase, and the letting agent had laughed off her concerns with a story about a previous tenant who'd kept rabbits. At first, Isla tried to rationalize it. Edinburgh's old town was riddled with hidden spaces, sealed-off cellars, forgotten staircases, and the building dated to 1820, so of course it would talk back to you in the small hours. She even knocked back on the floor once, a rhythmic rap-rap-pause. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like a held breath. And then came the reply, rap-rap-pause, identical from directly beneath her socked feet, and a chill spilled down her neck because the sound was too perfect a mimicry, not an echo, but a response. Over the following weeks, the phenomena escalated. She'd come home to find kitchen cupboards open. Not all of them, but the same two every time, the ones closest to the floor. I'm inside, the items were rearranged by size, smallest to largest, as if a meticulous hand had tidied them while she was at work. Then the notes started. They appeared under the kitchen door in handwriting so small and cramped it looked like insect tracks, written in a brownish ink that Isla desperately wanted to believe was old fountain pen fluid. And the messages were always short, polite, deeply wrong. I can hear you breathing. It's nice. You walk heavier than the last one. One morning that made her blood stop. I see you when you sleep. You look peaceful. I almost don't want to wake you. She called the police, who humored her by pulling up a loose floorboard, shining a torch into the crawl space, and finding nothing but a thick layer of dust, a few rat droppings, and a Victorian-era child's shoe. Leather, tiny, the laces still tied. The officer suggested she change the locks and maybe see someone about anxiety. And the condescension in his voice almost convinced her she was losing her mind until 3 nights later, when the power went out and she heard the floorboards in the kitchen being lifted from below, one by one, the nails squealing out of old wood with a sound like teeth being pulled. Isla grabbed her phone and a chef's knife and locked herself in the bedroom, dialing 99 with shaking fingers. And as she stammered her address to the operator, she heard the kitchen door handle rattle once, twice, and then the softest sound, a child's voice humming a nursery rhyme she recognized from her own Edinburgh childhood, Ally Bally, Lee Bally Bee, and the humming was moving down the hallway toward her. The operator kept asking questions, but Isla couldn't speak because a small shadow was now visible under the bedroom door, blocking the thin line of moonlight from the hall, and a voice. High and sweet and entirely too close, said, "You called the police. That wasn't very kind. I was going to wait. Now I'm too excited." The door handle turned, locked, thank God. Locked, and there was a sigh that seemed to come from every direction at once. And then the humming retreated back toward the kitchen, each retreating note punctured by the wet, heavy sound of something small crawling back down into the floor. When the police arrived, they found Isla catatonic, the knife still in her grip. And a thorough search of the property revealed something the first officer had missed beneath the kitchen floor. Beyond the crawl space, there was a bricked-up subcellar, not on any plan. And inside it were 17 child's shoes, all left feet, ranged in a circle around a shallow depression in the dirt floor shaped exactly like a small body lying down. The shoes dated from the 1830s through the 1980s, and each one had been worn, the leather creased from use. And each one had a name written on the sole in that same insect track handwriting. And the newest shoe, a child's pink plimsoll, had Isla written inside, with a tiny heart drawn next to it. Isla moved out that week, and the flat remains unoccupied to this day. But neighbors report that sometimes, on quiet nights, a light flickers in the kitchen window, and a small, patient voice can be heard singing through the floorboards, still waiting for a new friend to come and stay. And just like that, the dark settles back in. 3 stories, 3 ordinary people who brushed up against something that had no name, no mercy, and no intention of being forgotten. Cole is still looking over his shoulder every time the woods go quiet. Lachlan and Tegan can still feel the outback humming beneath their skin. And somewhere in Edinburgh, the kitchen floor waits for footsteps. These accounts remind us that true horror doesn't need jump scares. It just needs a place you thought was safe. If even one of these made your heart beat a little faster, then you understand why I collect these experiences. Because the world is full of corners where the light doesn't reach, and someone has to listen. You've just become part of that someone. Tell me in the comments which story burrowed deepest into your mind. And if you have a true experience of your own, share it. I might feature it in the next video. Hit like, subscribe if you haven't, and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the unseen. Until next time, keep your doors locked and your ears sharp. The dark is always listening.